Hey everybody, Attorney Somm here. Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to be discussing my approach for food and wine pairings for 6 common types of cuisine that you probably order on a regular basis. At the end, I'm going to be discussing 3 of my high-level principles that I incorporate in my daily life when I go about pairing food and wine. So be sure to stick around for that. But let's get right into it. We're going to start with everyone's favorite, the burger. And now that they even have vegetarian options, including the Impossible Burger, everyone can enjoy this American favorite. My personal preference when pairing wine with a burger is to get a Syrah. Not just any Syrah, but a big, savage, juicy Syrah, oftentimes a New World Syrah, Washington or California, or perhaps even an Australian Shiraz. The burger just goes incredibly well with this sort of a Syrah. If you haven't tried it yet, I definitely encourage you to do so. It's definitely one of my favorites. Next, we'll talk about seafood. Seafood is a pretty broad category, so we're going to divide it up a little bit into 3 subparts. Salmon, of course, is a go-to for many people, and it's a very common option on dining menus. With salmon, I oftentimes pair Pinot Noir. That's typically a classic. The type of Pinot Noir you get would probably vary depending on the preparation. If it's going to be a grilled salmon with a little bit of char on it, you might go with something a little bit bigger, like a Sonoma Coast Pinot. If it's a more delicate preparation, then oftentimes an Oregon Pinot or perhaps even an Old World Pinot such as a Burgundy might be a good choice. If you're going to do lobster or shellfish, especially if it's a type of a shellfish that has butter on the side, my personal favorite is to get a Chardonnay. Oftentimes this would even be a Chardonnay that's rich and buttery, that's undergone malolactic fermentation. This pairs extraordinarily well with the richness and the texture of the lobster or shellfish. Another option would be to choose a Chardonnay-based champagne, and they even have some now that have been oak fermented, like the Bielcart Simon Sous-Bois. This is a gastronomic champagne that pairs extraordinarily well with a number of different foods, including shellfish. So that's something to check out as well. If you're going to be doing oysters, Muscadet, of course, is classic, but in addition, you could also do champagne or even vodka martinis. Pizza is the next type of cuisine we're going to be discussing. With pizza, it's really hard to go wrong, and there's a number of fantastic choices. Of course, you can go with Italian wine, such as Barolo, Barbaresco, Chianti. All these go extremely well with pizza. I oftentimes also enjoy Napa Cabs, but ones that have lots of age on them. So after maybe 7 or 8 years or even more, the Napa Cab I find goes really well with pizza. Red Zinfandel is another choice. If you get some of the California Red Zinfandel, this oftentimes goes very well with pizza. And one unusual pairing that's worth discussing is Sauterne. One time we ended up having Sauterne, Chateau de Chem actually, with pizza, and it worked out surprisingly well. It was a really fun pairing and thing that was really interesting. I guess it's not that far-fetched because oftentimes in France they'll serve Sauterne with the cheese course after the meal is over. Certainly pizza has a lot of cheese ordinarily, so it's not that much of a reach. But it was definitely a surprise for me, and certainly one well worth trying if you're a bit adventurous. Next up is sushi, and for me there's only one way to go with sushi, and that's Blanc de Blanc champagne. Blanc de Blanc champagne is made from 100% Chardonnay, and it tends to have plenty of acidity. This pairs perfectly with sushi and the delicate, precise flavors. If you haven't tried this pairing yet, I highly recommend it. Barbecue is the next item that I'll be discussing. And for barbecue, I've found that Red Zin from California is actually the perfect pairing for barbecue. There's something about the smokiness of the meat that pairs perfectly with the richness and the fruity profile of the Red Zin. Some of my favorite producers include Ridge, Bedrock, and Carlisle. In particular, a number of these producers have a Pagani Ranch offering, which I very much enjoy. Many people are always wondering what to pair with Indian cuisine or with tacos or spicy Mexican foods, things of that nature. And whenever you have a lot of heat, you have to be very careful with the pairing because oftentimes the alcohol can accentuate the heat and it can make the food seem even hot. But to cut through that heat, what you need is a wine with a little bit of sweetness or residual sugar. And my favorite go-to is German Riesling, like a Cabinet, for example. This works perfectly and it helps to offset the heat from these spicy foods. Interestingly enough, many times when I'm with friends and we're eating these foods, I'll pair it with the German Riesling. They'll try the Riesling first and they won't like it, or they'll think it's too sweet. But once they have it with the food, they can't believe how perfect it is together, and they absolutely wouldn't have it any other way from that point forward. Now that we've discussed my specific recommendations and some of my favorites with different types of cuisine, it's time to focus on my 3 high-level principles that I use when pairing wine. First, you don't always have to use wine as a pairing. In fact, my preference for high-end wine is to not pair it with food at all. I think certain high-end wines are much better enjoyed by themselves without the distraction from food. Oftentimes it's fun to just enjoy the wine and see how it progresses over the course of an evening or even a couple hours. And so you don't necessarily want the distraction of having to eat your meal at the same time. Second, when you're in doubt, be sure to choose a wine that has high acidity. Acid is the friend of food, so you're definitely going to want to look for a high acid wine whenever you're in doubt about what to order. These are often the most versatile food pairing options as well. So for reds, we're talking about wines such as Pinot Noir or Etna Rosso or Rioja from Spain. These are all great options, and they tend to be lighter bodied reds as well. If you're talking about a white wine, then I would look to dry Riesling or perhaps Chablis, which is Chardonnay from the Burgundy region of France. These are also high acid options that are very, very food friendly and versatile, and you can't go wrong with these wines. In some instances, they may not be the 100% best pairing, but in many instances they will, and they certainly won't be a foe to any of the foods that you order, and they'll definitely be something that will go with the vast majority of dishes, and you should enjoy them very much. Lastly, do not forget about sparkling wine or champagne. Champagne and sparkling wine are incredibly versatile and food friendly. I've even had meals where I've paired them from start to finish with nothing but champagne. For example, you can of course start with a Brut or a Blanc de Blanc with your early courses, and then progress up to a rosé champagne with your entree. Especially if there's some still red wine in the rosé champagne, this could even stand up to some meat or to other entree courses just fine. And then of course for dessert, you could get the demi-sec champagne. That pairs perfectly with dessert in many instances. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next one. I come out with videos like this at least once a week, typically on Sundays. Until then, drink well.